I'm Taygan, and we're here with the OCD Anxiety Treatment Center with another segment on becoming the expert. So last time you talked about some tips and tricks, and you said you were going into some more details. So you want to talk a little more about that?
Yeah, so I feel like we got to talk about anxiety, we got to talk about OCD, and I started talking about some things that might be helpful, but I left out the most important, and I did that on purpose because I felt like it deserved its own time. And,
Its own segment.
Yeah, its own segment, and that's because it really is our golden thread in the clinic of how we treat all of the disorders that we treat in the clinic. And that is what I would call #face your fears. And I know that you guys do not think that's cool anymore, but I do think it's cool. So I'm gonna keep doing it. And the technical term is exposure work, right? And so I want to go, and I know this is gonna bore you guys, but I'm still gonna go into a little bit of detail, and I'll try to do it as fast as I can, on what is happening in your brain and the reason why we do exposure work in the clinic. So when we talk about anxiety, when we talk about OCD, you have this little cute part in your brain, and it is so fun. It's called the amygdala. Did you guys know that?
No.
Okay, so it is actually really important in all the diagnoses we treat because it is what we would call, and maybe you've heard of this, the fight, flight, or freeze response. Have you guys ever heard of that?
Yeah.
Okay, so whenever you do anything that you might think is dangerous, this little part of your brain is really important because it starts to fire and it tells you that something is dangerous. So think of something that actually is dangerous. What is dangerous in your life?
Cliff.
Perfect. Oh my gosh, that's a perfect example. So we go to Lake Powell, right? And all of a sudden you're standing at the edge of a cliff and your amygdala starts to go off and it starts to say, you probably shouldn't jump off this cliff.
Yeah, they do.
And it starts firing, and then I push you. And that's a really good thing because you could be harmed if you jump off the cliff in Lake Powell. Right? Mm-hmm. And so this goes off all the time. This has been there since the dawn of time. You think of big cavemen sitting around a fire in their cave, and they're looking around and they're saying, oh, okay, we're safe right now. And then all of a sudden a saber-toothed tiger comes in, and they're like, whoa, and they don't have Google at the time where they're like, is this cat dangerous? So instead, their amygdala starts to go off and says, this cat is going to eat me, I should run away. Fantastic, right? It's really helpful. Here's the problem, is someone with anxiety-based disorders or someone with OCD, that little mechanism, that fight, flight, or freeze response, it starts to go off and it lies to them. It tells them that something is dangerous when it's really not. So start thinking about the things that we've talked about in previous segments, or things that you guys have talked about that cause you anxiety, right? Last time we talked about sports or soccer that might cause you guys worried. We talked about school or balance in your life. In OCD, we talked about scrupulosity or fear of breaking commandments. And so all of a sudden, they're not facing a cliff. They're not facing a saber-toothed tiger. But all of a sudden they're facing balance in their life, and their amygdala starts to fire, and it fills, and I want you guys to really hear this because I think it's really important. I think it's one of the most heartbreaking parts of OCD and anxiety-based disorders, is it starts to fire and it feels exactly like they are facing a saber-toothed tiger. It feels exactly like they're standing at the edge of a cliff and their brain is firing. So all of a sudden, in that moment where you start to feel like, oh my gosh, my life is out of balance, how am I going to handle it? How am I going to handle my life right now? Or Addie, last night we were talking about boyfriend leaving to North Carolina, right?
Yes.
And you're by yourself for this summer. Mm-hmm. And you start to think, oh my gosh, I'm gonna be by myself this summer instead of have my boyfriend. And so all of a sudden you start thinking, and your brain starts firing, and it starts to think, I'm alone, and in every way your brain starts to think, I am facing a saber-toothed tiger.
Yeah.
And if I were to pause in that moment And this would be super cool if I was like a genie and I could pause time and show up and be like, hey. And I said, we get to run up to the University of Utah Hospital or wherever you are, whatever location. And I said, we get to take a picture of your brain. This is what's so heartbreaking, right? That is why they call anxiety-based disorders and OCD mind on fire. Because if I was to take a picture of your brain in that moment, from your amygdala all the way up to your prefrontal cortex, it would look like your mind was on fire. It would be firing, right? And it would be trying to tell you to do 100 things in that moment. It would be telling you to have fear. It would be telling you to maybe panic. And all of a sudden your heart starts racing and you start sweating. And it would be telling you to maybe feel sadness and you start crying, right? It would be telling you to run. It would be telling you to avoid. It would be telling you to do all of these things. And that is what's so heartbreaking is in that moment, what do you want to do as a mom? What do you want to do as a loved one? I want to tell you, it's going to be fine, Addie. You're going to be just fine. You don't have to do anything at all. But if you have a saber-toothed tiger coming at you, how long are you going to sit around and listen to me say, you're fine?
Probably not very long.
Right?
Yeah.
If you're standing at the edge of the cliff and I've got my hands on your back to push you, are you going to feel fine when I say, hey, you're fine?
Probably not.
Probably not. And that's what's so hard is so many other therapists even in the community, so many parents that mean the best, they try to talk their way out of it. They try to logic their way out of OCD. They try to logic their way out of worry. Logic and talk therapy is never going to win the day. It's not, because it's not going to settle that brain. And even if it does in that moment, settle the brain for just a minute. And even when we talk about mindfulness techniques, even if that settles it for a moment, it's going to have no long-term effect because that moment is going to just keep going. The brain is going to keep that false alarm system going. It's going to keep telling you that you have a saber-toothed tiger headed at you all the time. Keep firing, saber-toothed tiger, saber-toothed tiger. And your emotions totally feel like that, right? And so we have to do something totally different with OCD work and with anxiety-based disorders. The only thing that actually changes that false alarm system going is to turn around and face that saber-toothed tiger. Even though it's the last thing you want to do in that moment, it's the only thing that will have, it's the most effective thing. So what we have to do is I have to say, hey, turn around and face it. Because in all actuality, I get to turn around and say, hey, that is just a house cat. It's just a house cat. And even though your brain is telling you that it's a saber-toothed tiger, it's a house cat. But you're not going to believe me until you pick it up. And then the minute you pick up that cat, your brain is going to have this beautiful moment where it goes, whoa, my mom wasn't lying. She wasn't. In that moment, that cat doesn't have fangs. And it didn't take a chunk out of my shoulder. And they really are extinct. And your brain gets to see that it was just lying to you. And that's what exposure work is once you get to face your fear, it is the magic sauce. It is what we do every day, all day at our clinic. It is what happens around the country to change we get to feel fancy, build new neural pathways in the brain. We get to face our fears. And so we will talk more about it, but that is what I want to share more than anything, is we get to recalibrate the brain with exposure work. So the best thing we can do for anxiety-based disorders and OCD, my friends, is face your fears. Alrighty, so we're glad you tuned in today, and make sure to tune in again, and we'll definitely talk more about facing your fears and exposure work and more strategies for anxiety and OCD work. Thanks so much.
Bye.